Just 1.5 seconds separated the top three after 65 laps of the Monaco Grand Prix, and just 15 points covers now those top three in the World Drivers' Championship. Sergio Perez, it was, who won the race, his third Grand Prix victory, and he becomes now the most successful Mexican in the history of Formula One. Welcome everybody to the Go F1 show. Wow, that was something of a Monaco Grand Prix, baby. And I want to get straight into it and welcome one of my best mates, Alex Yoong. Welcome from Kuala Lumpur. What do you think about that?
Yes, great to watch. Monaco, like we say, it's normally quite boring, but you just add a little sprinkle of rain, always makes it exciting. I mean, we even saw some overtaking today, which was pretty special.
It was pretty special. We've got a pretty special show coming up. We're going to be catching up on, of course, the full 65 laps of the Monaco Grand Prix. We're also going to be looking into Kimi Räikkönen's return to racing. We're going to have an exclusive chat with Colton Herta ahead of today's Indy 500. But before we do that, let's welcome our special guest to the show. His name is Mark Gallagher, and Mark has worked in Formula One for over 30 years, including for Jordan Grand Prix and Red Bull Racing. He started his own operation, Status GP, which became a race-winning team in junior formulae, including actually at the Monaco Grand Prix in 2012. There it is, with our very own Marlon Stockinger from the Philippines. And until 2012, Mark led the Cosworth Formula One engine company, and more recently has become a public speaker and an author about the business of Formula One. Mark was in Formula One this weekend. He hot-footed it back to the UK to join us. Thank you, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you so much. And I'm so pleased to be joining you on this evening after seeing that amazing race today, and look forward to having a good chat with you and Alex about all the key points.
So let's get into it straight away with the top three finishers, and I want to ask you, Mark, about what you think about. Let's talk about Sergio straight away. Great victory.
It's just fantastic, isn't it? I mean, I delight in seeing people achieve their dreams, and I think that's what sport's all about. And when you see a driver who's been around as long, and he won't mind us saying this, as long as he has, and he's then had this extraordinary break in his career with Red Bull Racing as effectively number two driver to Max Verstappen, and that was brought home very clearly by what happened last week in Spain, and then to come into Monaco and win the race as well, after a little shunt at the end of qualifying, which rather protected ultimately his grid starting position because Max had his lap ruined. So all in all, it played out pretty well, and I can only begin to imagine what the reaction in Mexico is going to be tonight, because I was there 2 weeks ago after the Miami Grand Prix, and to say Mexico as a country is behind him is just something else.
Alex?
Yeah, no, it's quite amazing, actually. I'm super pleased with Perez. There's a good shot just now of Mark when you looked after the A1 Team Ireland team as well. And of course, I forget Sergio raced with us when he represented Mexico. So, he's been one of the less fashionable teams over the last decade. But, how he's come on, and I was so pleased to see him get the chance in Red Bull. And yes, you do feel like he's number two driver, but he's just not sitting there, isn't he? I mean, his pace the whole weekend was really, really good. Out-qualified Max for the second time this year, and has really well-deserved win.
What was it about what he did compared to the others in the top four that gave Checo this victory in his 220th Grand Prix?
I think from my perspective, it was very clear early on in the race that he was running really strongly. And obviously we were dealing with hugely changeable conditions. But I was sitting watching the timing monitor sector by sector, and I realized there was just this pivotal moment, which actually the main feed commentators didn't really pick up on. You could see that Sergio was ideally positioned if he could just get onto the right tires, and sure enough, he did. He had the gap just right, and simultaneously you could see it starting to fall apart for Ferrari, and sure enough, it's just played out perfectly. So again, going back to Alex's point, Sergio has been driving well all weekend, apart from that minor hit with a barrier at the end of qualifying. He's been driving very strongly, and to be fair, he's been driving very strongly all along. So what we've seen in this race is everything come together. And we all know in racing, that's what you're looking for, everything to fall into the right place. And the timing, of course, being critical. But he was doing everything right, and it came his way. And no one's going to argue that he doesn't deserve today's victory.
And he was doing everything right, including in qualifying, wasn't he? Because if he hadn't qualified ahead of his teammate, then he wouldn't have been in that position to take advantage of that double stack pit stop. What did you think of it when you saw it, Alex, when they did that?
I think that really, though, where Sergio got that big advantage, yes, he had to do it in qualifying, but he's quick in all the practice sessions as well. So it always looked like it was possible to out-qualify Verstappen today. I wasn't actually surprised to see him do it. But where Sergio had that really good thing was going to the intermediate early, because he was the first of the front runners to do it, like Mark said. And that was a bit risky, because the conservative gamble would say, take the rain tires all the way and go to the slicks. But no, he made the right call. The team made the right call at the right time, and his pace on the intermediates was so quick. So like you said, qualifying. So when you're going to double stack, he's got the advantage at that point, especially in Monaco. It's not easy to let Verstappen through. So I think he also would have taken a little bit of spirit from the last race when he had to let Verstappen through in that race too.
And before we move on to the others in the race, what is it about this year's car or this year's Sergio that means that he's able to be so much closer to his teammate on pace, not only in the races but in qualifying? Mark, have you got any insight to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I know quite a few of the guys at Red Bull, and the feeling is that, I mean, here's a guy who came into a team who has a vast amount of experience, and that's not to say Max doesn't have a lot of experience. Of course he does, but Sergio's been at this a long time. He knows what's what when it comes to getting the most out of a car, and also he knows what he needs from the package. When you change teams, it takes a little while to get to know the people you're working with, to kind of bed yourself in, even if you have got a lot of experience. And I think what we're now seeing is actually him on a trajectory of improved performance, because he's extremely comfortable in that car. He knows he's got a competitive package. This is what all drivers dream of, and he's now gotten his break. So even though he is fully aware of the fact that the team is focused on winning the Drivers' Championship for Max, and obviously the Constructors' Championship as well, he also knows from his contractual position that if things fall the right way, as happened today, he can go out there and win. And so he's grabbing opportunities with both hands. And if you think back to some of his defensive driving, last year to help Max during races, to protect Max, I mean, he has gone above and beyond to help the team. And he quite rightfully, I think, this year feels that he has to take those opportunities when they come his way. And that's what he's done today. And as Alex says, of course, he went on to the intermediates when he did, but actually the team had been watching what some of the cars down the field were doing in terms of times and sector times. And so the risk didn't feel that high, and they went for it, and Sergio then carried it through. So I think he's just simply really comfortable in the team, in the car. Package is obviously fantastic, and as a result, he's able to make the most of it.
Well, he certainly is, isn't he? Because he's, if I'm not mistaken, he's had a win, and he's had 3 P2s in the last 6 races, which I think is as many as he's had for the entirety of the rest of his career. So he certainly is making hay while the sun shines. Before we move on to anybody else, Alex, because we jumped straight into this, could you just take us through the sort of the summary, the bullet point? I think we've got a graphic here to show our viewers what I think happened.
Well, I mean, this is good. Well, it speaks for itself. Obviously we started in the rain. And it's quite interesting. We saw at the very beginning, so Gasly going into super early, and that seemed to work quite well for him. Then Leclerc pitting for the Inters early, after the Red Bulls had started to do that, was a bit of a surprise, because Leclerc had a bit of a gap from Sainz. But anyway, it didn't pay off for him. Ferrari double stacked the slicks, and then Red Bull also double stacked the slicks later, because once you went to intermediates, you had to go to the slicks, and that overcut the Ferrari, put him in P1. And then after that, we had that restart, didn't we? We had the red flag after the crash for Mick Schumacher. And then when it restarted, it was dry. And we saw a more typical Monaco Grand Prix in the dry. It's very hard to overtake. But of course, Perez were on the mediums. but both Red Bulls were on the mediums compared to the Ferraris were on the hards. So you could see Perez had to defend really hard at the very end.
And let's talk about Ferrari then, because it was their front row lockout here in qualifying, as they were in 2017 when, of course, Kimi won the Grand Prix. I think everybody was expecting that Ferrari, with the pace they had and those two drivers, they should have won the Grand Prix. And before we get into the elephant in the room, which of course is the local driver, let's talk about Carlos, because I thought he deserved to win it, really, with that bold decision that he made from the car, Mark, to skip the intermediates and go straight onto the hard tyre from the wets.
Yeah, and I disagree with you on that, because I'm thinking, Carlos, can you please don't do what you think you should be doing. Go with what the team feels. I mean, they have the big picture. They're literally watching the competition, and much closer than you are as a driver. And I think this is I was talking about this last week with some folk down in the mid part of the week down in Monaco when I arrived, and we were just talking about the way in which race strategy has evolved over the years. And of course, you take into consideration all the feedback you get from the driver. They're often described as the biggest sensor in the car, the amount of feedback a driver can give you. But ultimately, the team's strategy room has the big picture of what's happening with them, their teammate, and all the competition. And when Carlos was saying, we should stay out, again, I was watching the timing screens and thinking, sorry, not at the rate with which the intermediates have come in. And when, yes, track position is everything in Monaco, but when someone is now gaining 2-3 seconds, Perez a second a sector in some cases, it was so much time. It was so obvious to me that he needed to go and frankly just cover that off, and to stay out ultimately really bit him. So yeah, I mean, it was brave of him to go for it, but ultimately I think it probably cost him the win. It'll be really interesting to go back through, the sequence of times and the differentials. But there's no doubt there was that moment of debate and hesitation, and you can't have that. You have to make the judgment call. And on this occasion, they didn't get it quite right.
So just to be clear, do you think that Sainz should have gone onto the Inters? And if he had, he would have been further up the road than he actually was, ultimately stopping only once?
Yeah, at the time when he was having the discussion, the Inters were, for me, the way to go, just based on what I was seeing elsewhere down the timing screen. And again, I thought, okay, again, track position is all important. We know that in Monaco, and there's a tendency to say, well, let's just stay out, keep going. And obviously he felt the wet. I mean, he was still doing good lap times on the wets, but he definitely began to enter a window where the risk of staying out was clearly just building all the time. And the proof of that was, and actually it was interesting to see, on the live feed, even the commentators were missing the fact that, Perez was going to get the jump here. It was coming to him. And, I mean, he was just nailing in the times. And sure enough, it came his way. And I think it slightly caught everyone by surprise.
Yeah. And also, I think it might be a bit of a larger problem, really. Because by the time Ferrari asked him to come in for that first intermediate stop, it was too late already. Because Perez had done 2 laps in Inters at this point. So the undercut was already done. So I also understand why he feels, okay, I've already got taken. Let's just try and gamble on the one stop and go straight to slicks. But it is part of a larger problem, because I agree with Mark that, drivers need to have gone through all these strategy parts in preparation before the race. Okay, it's very tricky when it's wet like this. It's very hard to predict everything before the race starts. But it's part of a whole group of the team making the right decisions. And Ferrari have a history of not doing that well. And we haven't really talked about it yet, but operationally, we've seen Ferrari fall apart quite a bit over the last few years. Remember 2 years with Vettel, and when Vettel and Leclerc were quite serious, but halfway through the season, they started making operational mistakes and stuff. So this one, you could argue, is an operational mistake, And Ferrari have to be very, very careful that they don't spiral out of control like they did, 2018, when Vettel was really in the hunt for the championship. So this is a symptom, if you like, of an old problem, and the team needs to be sharper, because Red Bull are super sharp right now.
That Alex, I think this is one of the key words. Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head there, Alex. And I think one of the
Yeah.
One of the things that is really interesting is when you talk to people who've had senior roles at Ferrari and have then left the team, they'll talk to you about the fact that from the outside, people have no idea the pressure that you feel when you're at Ferrari. You've got I've talked to people who've worked at Red Bull, worked at McLaren, ended up at Ferrari in senior roles, and said nothing prepares you for the level of scrutiny and therefore the level of pressure that the team feels, and then the impact that that has on almost making you tighten up. You're afraid to take risks. That if you like, there's not quite the kind of entrepreneurial risk taking that you might get in a Toto Wolff run Mercedes or a Christian Horner run Red Bull, where again we're all racers. There are racers at Ferrari, but they have a whole level of pressure on their shoulders, which I think sometimes just burdens them a little bit, and you feel that they just seize up at moments where perhaps, and I'll call it the British teams, the teams based in the UK who have got perhaps a broader talent base within their organisations, just sometimes they seem to have a little bit more freedom. And I think that's where, you just see Ferrari slightly tighten, and no wonder Charles is upset.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Charles then, since you brought it up, Mark. I was going to see if we could just gloss over it and move on to something less contentious. But let's look at the bright side first of all. The silver lining to the cloud is that it's the first time he's actually finished at the Monaco circuit, having failed to finish in 2 Formula 2 races and 3 Formula 1. So he's not, and he did get his 14th pole, didn't he, yesterday? How's he feeling now, and what do you think? Actually, we've got quite an amusing tweet, another one from WTF1. I think we're going to show you now with an image of it's not actually obviously Leclerc rushing off to see his team strategist.
God, love that. The famous Michael Spa '98 photograph. David Coulthard talks often about the fact that he kept his helmet on that day because he knew Michael was going to whack him. Charles will be he'll be properly annoyed. He'll be really, really disappointed with not converting pole into the win on his home track. You're absolutely right, Matthew. He'll be happy to have gotten the finish, grab a decent few points, but he'll be looking at the Drivers' Championship standings and reflecting on the fact that Sergio Perez is now 6 points behind him. He's actually got Perez closer to him than he is to Max, and it's extraordinary the way in which the championship is now pivoting Red Bull's way. Basically every race Max finished, he won. And now this weekend when Max didn't win, Sergio won. And so Charles isn't even picking up the win when Max doesn't win the race. And worse than that, he's not even on the podium. So he will be properly annoyed. There has to be a sense now as we reach the end of May, a third of the championship effectively done, that the trend is not a good one. For Ferrari versus Red Bull. And whatever's happening with Mercedes, whether they're beginning to get their house in order or not, the simple fact is that Ferrari seem to be slightly dipping at a moment where Red Bull are coming on strong, with both drivers now having won Grand Prix.
Don't you think that actually the Red Bull car has been the fastest since the beginning of the season, Alex, and it's the reliability that's got in their way, no?
No, I don't think so. I actually think, yes, reliability got in the way for Leclerc at the last race in Barcelona. But Ferrari definitely Barcelona, definitely picked a quicker car here in Monaco in normal conditions. And they should have converted both, and they didn't. Now we go to the next 4 races, which are definitely Red Bull tracks, and the Red Bull could be gone. If Verstappen wins 4 races on a trot, that championship looks very, very different. So, and at the moment, you can see the constructors standing right now, Red Bull looking really good with the Perez bringing the points. We talked about at the beginning of the year, it really depended on how the number 2 drivers would do, would determine how that championship would go. And right now, Red Bull's number 2 drivers bring the bacon home, shall we say. And that's why they're looking quite comfortable there. Mercedes there in P3 is pretty good. And then that battle for fourth is going to be a great battle, and I'm going to enjoy watching the battle for fourth for the rest of the season. But it's really tough for Ferrari because they need to find a solution to the straight line speed that at the very end of the straight, because we got long straights coming out. It's not just horsepower tracks, because Ferrari horsepower is fine, but it's the drag at the end of the straights which is killing them. And if Ferrari don't have a fix for that, these next four races are going to go Red Bull's way.
So
it's extraordinary to see Mercedes-Benz 100 points behind Red Bull Racing after a third of the season. 100 points, it kind of really brings it home to you how when Toto and James Allison talk about the season having gotten away from them, it really has. It's hard to see. They're not going to come back from that. But it is extraordinary, isn't it? And of course we know how quickly motor racing moves on. But after 8 years of Mercedes-Benz dominance of the Constructors' World Championship, it's certainly quite a moment to come out of Monaco and look at that deficit.
Well, 8th there in the standings is the Haas team, and I think we should just quickly check in, if you like, on Mick Schumacher. It was his crash, of course, on lap 27 as the track was drying, and as often is the case, isn't it? The track dries, but there's a bit of wet, and he pretty much comprehensively destroyed certainly the rear end of his Haas car, but he walked away and seemingly unhurt. Certainly until he got back to the pits and had to talk to his team about the damage to the car. So it was a pretty big shunt. Alex, did you think it was driver error or anything other than driver error?
Well, I tell you what, when I looked at it head on, it looked like something had failed on the rear left corner, because the way it snapped around was very unusual. But I also noticed in the replays, he didn't go over the curb. He went over the left-hander apex curb, but he missed the right-hand apex curb. And that tells me maybe he was a little bit too far to the left coming out of that corner. And you know how it is on a drying track. You just need to put 1 inch of your tire off the dry line onto a little bit of wet, and that's it. The car's going to snap around. So, I think the fact that he didn't ride the curb on the right side told me he was 3-4 inches to the left coming out of the corner, and that could have been enough to put it on a bit of damp patch and send him around.
Yeah, I think you're right. We dived obviously straight into this. We've got the top stories covered. If you just joined us, welcome to the Go F1 show. Let's just kind of slightly recap by having a look at the results of the Monaco Grand Prix. Here they are, which reminds us that Sergio Perez has taken his third Grand Prix victory ahead of Carlos Sainz, with Max Verstappen third and Charles Leclerc fourth. Ferrari and Red Bull, of course, or Red Bull and Ferrari, I should say, leading the way. George Russell, again, a top 6 position at every race this season so far. Lando Norris got the fastest lap, having put on some fresh tyres towards the end of the race. Fernando Alonso was holding up the pack for much of the race, but he finished 7th ahead of Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, and Sebastian Vettel came in 10th. Those are the results. I think we should, if we can, we talked about constructors, and there's been a big debate in the paddock this week, and Mark, you were there for much of it before you hustled back to join us for the show, about the business of Formula One. You know a bit about that, obviously, having written a book called that. But in particular on the cost cap. Can we dig into a little bit on the cost cap and what's happening at the moment?
Well, quite simply, what's happening at the moment is that, as ever, there's a development race between the top teams, and as the teams develop, they spend money, and they're spending more money than they anticipated. Christian Horner's been very clear about that. Toto Wolff and his team have talked about it. Well, even Ferrari, perhaps not surprisingly, Ferrari are also finding it difficult to keep within the restrictions of the cost cap. The cost cap was originally brought in at $145 million on a sliding scale of then $140 million this year and then $135 million next year. And there is a real challenge for the top 3 teams. And I say the top 3 teams because for many of the other teams, it's not a question of coming down to that cost cap. They actually wouldn't normally reach it, or they would struggle to get to that level anyway. So it certainly is a factor for every team. But for the top 3 teams who are used to spending a great deal more than that on the car, on the technical research and development, design, manufacturing, operations, spare parts. It's basically, think of the cost cap as being everything to do with building and racing the cars and operating the racing team. It doesn't include a whole raft of things such as the driver's salaries, the top 3 salaries of the top 3 employees in the team. It doesn't cover marketing. It doesn't cover HR costs. It doesn't cover property costs. There's lots of areas which are not included in the cost cap. So think of the cost cap as very much about the cars and racing and development. And it's proving extremely challenging. We always knew it would. There are some additional factors which are coming into play. Due to the energy price crisis, which here in Europe is very, very significant, we are seeing substantial increases in energy costs. And if you look, for example, at the cost of factory operations, like the single biggest source of carbon emissions from a Formula One factory are the wind tunnels, and that's because they use so much energy to power them. So that if your energy bill is jumping 30, 40, 50% every time you do a wind tunnel run, every time you do some development, or every time you use those supercomputers to run a CFD computation. So again, you're talking about data centers, which are energy hungry. The costs have gone up. So the teams are effectively, the top teams are saying the budget cap is difficult to adhere to. And it'll be interesting to see the reaction of, I don't think they're going to get a lot of sympathy from the smaller teams. I don't think the FIA will be rushing to raise the cap. And I certainly don't think Formula One Group will be rushing to do that either. They will say, well, you have to cut your costs. I have to cut your cloth accordingly. So there's a lot of debate around it. And I mean, we can get further into the detail of it, but all I will say is it's an incredibly robust process that they are going through. Next month, at the 30th of June, all of the teams have to present their financials from the first part of this season. And, so effectively you have an interim cost result. So this is our interim expenditure. And, there are penalties here, and the penalties are really quite significant if you start to overstep the mark. So, we're essentially operating in a whole new world in Formula One where you have sporting regulations, you have technical regulations, you have financial regulations. And to breach those financial regulations would be as serious as turning up with an underweight car or, breaching a sporting regulation.
And no sympathy from the top teams, Alex. Before I want to get off, because our viewers, do they have any sympathy for this? As we keep on this conversation, do tweet us or other social media at GoF1 Show. Alex, have you got any sympathy for the big teams?
No, none whatsoever. I mean, there was such a big regulation. I got lots of sympathy for small teams. I've always raced with the small teams. But, with such a big regulation change, like we had this year, normally we see the big teams just run away with it. It's a big gap between the big teams and the small teams. We haven't seen it this year. We've actually seen the teams be pretty close together. We've even seen teams like Haas and Alfa Romeo be strong and mix it with the big boys, especially earlier on in the beginning of the season. And that's because of these, not necessarily because of the cost cap, because that hasn't actually had an effect yet, but these equalizing factors that should come into sport. The fact that they're limiting wind tunnel time for the bigger teams because they won the championship, and you get more wind tunnel time for the smaller teams, which is a way of offsetting the fact that the bigger teams will always find more sponsorship, and whereas the smaller teams will never be able to find that sort of sponsorship. So all these things are good because it makes the gaps between the teams smaller, it makes it fairer, and that's what sport should be.
Isn't there a danger, Mark, that the bigger teams would have to lay off staff if they don't want to either turn off those wind tunnels and computers that you've mentioned, or obviously more seriously, is there a danger of people losing their jobs?
Yeah, well, that's already happened, and we've seen Ferrari redeploy staff. I know that teams, for example, when people leave the company, they are more likely to redeploy existing staff than to employ new people. I talked to Mercedes-Benz when I was studying this last year, and they admitted, I think the number they gave me was 50 to 60 employees have gone completely out of the operation. Now, you have to bear in mind that's a big operation, including the powertrain division. It's like nearly 1,800 people. So 50 out of 1,800 is not exactly a massive cut. And again, you would lose that in a year in terms of people just moving on, going to get other jobs, or retiring out of your business. So the numbers are less. However, what we're talking about, I think, really is a kind of an interesting, it's a kind of deeply philosophical debate about what should a team be allowed to do to be competitive in Formula One. Clearly, the top teams are used to being able to spend and develop their car and iterate the car race to race, month to month, bringing those upgrades that we're always talking about. Those upgrades are expensive. And the simple fact is that, with the pace of development that they are used to, they're trying to adjust that curve. Alex has pointed out that some of the smaller teams have kind of been showing well because dollar for dollar, the smaller teams are more used to spending their money carefully. But I'll tell you one really interesting thing that I discovered last year was I spoke to Enrico Racca. Now, Enrico Racca is not a name that you would know very well in F1 circles, but he is the guy at Ferrari responsible for Ferrari making the budget cap. And I spoke to Enrico because he's dealing with the team that has traditionally had the biggest budget. And I was expecting him to really moan at me and say it's a complete nightmare and we're having a terrible time. And he actually said we're really relishing it at Ferrari. He said, we think it's great that you can now focus on making sure that every dollar you spend does something useful. And therefore it drives wastage out of our Formula One business. And he said, actually, our car business is looking very carefully at what we're learning from the budget cap in Formula One, because if we can develop competitive cars in Formula One in a much more cost-effective way than we used to, then he said that's actually really good for our business. And of course, it improves our profitability, etc. So he took a very positive view of it. And he said, it's challenging, but he said it's not impossible. And the other thing is everyone has signed up for it. So it's not as if it's picking on any one team. Everyone simply has to deliver. But I do completely think that as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there has been a commodity price increase globally. There's obviously an energy crisis. There are all kinds of additional costs coming through which were unforeseen. It is quite unprecedented what's happening. And of course, from a purely European perspective, all the Formula One teams are based in Europe. And they are therefore seeing very directly the increase in costs. And just for those listeners and viewers in other parts of the world, if I was to give you a kind of a measure, families, for example, in the United Kingdom are seeing their household energy bills in many cases tripling. I mean, it's actually that depends on who your energy provider is. That's substantial. So that the government in the UK has just announced that each family will now have a budget cap of about $4,000 and that's just for your energy, and that's for every family. Okay. And as you can imagine, not every family in the UK can afford a $4,000 energy bill. So that's a kind of very micro way of looking at
CFDs.
They're not. They're just trying to cook food and keep the lights on and the heating and so on. So you blow that up into the kind of budgets that we're talking about for Formula One. It's a very significant challenge, and I'm sure that there will be a discussion about the implications of this. What I could see happening is perhaps the FIA and Formula One agreeing that on certain things that you spend money on, such as energy, you are perhaps given an opportunity to have a specific overspend in certain areas. But if it comes down to more wind tunnel tests, more CFD, I don't think there'll be no sympathy for that.
Well, I think what they should do is they should stop having VIPs and celebrities on the grid, and they should sell those passes to sponsors and then put that money into the smaller teams. But anyway, we'll move on. Driver salaries are not included in the cost cap, which might be fortunate actually, because Daniel Ricciardo has been in the spotlight, hasn't he, because of his performances actually for quite a while now at McLaren. I think we've got a graphic to show us. Here it is. Let's not forget, 217 Grand Prix. He has won 8 of them. Alex, what do you think about Daniel?
He's definitely under pressure now, isn't he? And McLaren had a very change of tone this weekend, didn't they? Talking about the clauses in the contract that was specific, I think, or alluded to performance clauses. So both ways that was. I think Ricciardo is under pressure. I think he does need to find something quite seriously. It's coming to that part of the time of the year, isn't it, when these sort of conversations do start to happen, and Ricciardo, he did win a race last year, and he did improve towards the end of last year. But at the moment, he's quite a bit behind Lando Norris, and that's not so good for him.
You've watched him in most of those 200 and what it was, 16, 17 races. Alex, what is it? 217 races. What is it? Is there something wrong, or is it just that he's got Lando Norris as his teammate, and we don't realise yet how good Lando is?
I mean, we know how good Lando is. I mean, you've been watching Lando for a long time as well. He's a bit like in the old Verstappen, Leclerc, George Russell, new generation, more complete driver. Ricciardo reminds me a bit like Jenson Button. Jenson Button, world champion, fantastic driver. But if the car ever fell out of his window a little bit, and you always used to talk about needing a very secure rear end, his pace could disappear. He could have great years, like when he was up against Hamilton and could beat him fair and square, or against Alonso. But he could have other years where he just kind of lost his way a bit. And I think that happens with Ricciardo as well. We saw it with the last year in Red Bull when Verstappen started getting the edge on him, and the car direction started going Verstappen's way. Ricciardo didn't have any answers, and you could see that, okay, he'll never say this, but I think he left because it was getting a bit too hard. And now he's up against Lando Norris, and McLaren love Norris, and, perhaps, and here's Ricciardo's crash in FP2 on on Thursday. So you can see Ricciardo's pushing, and he's under pressure now, and these mistakes are starting to come. And, it's really tough for a driver when this starts happening. And we all love Danny Ricciardo. Hopefully he can turn it around.
Yeah. Let's talk about pressure. Let's talk about tough questions to Mark Gallagher. Is he going to keep his seat? And if you were the team leader, if you were Zach Brown, would you be keeping Daniel Ricciardo? And if not, what would you do? How would you move him on?
Well, I think if I was Zach Brown, I wouldn't have let it go this far, because it was clear last year there was already an issue. And actually, you've asked me a blunt question. Someone I know very well who is quite close to Daniel said to me when he made the decision to leave Red Bull that he was cashing out. And that was a very big statement. And what I meant by cashing out is by taking the money and going to Renault, Daniel will have known he was going to a team that did not have the capacity to win Grand Prix, let alone World Championships. So whatever the press release said, you just know that he was taking the money when he went there. And you can't blame him for that, because, if you're offered a really big amount of cash to drive for a factory team, and Cyril Abiteboul, the team boss, was very motivated to get Daniel into the team, and there was no love lost between Cyril, and of course Christian Horner at Red Bull. There was a big opportunity. Daniel grabbed it with both hands, and I mean, let's be clear. Within a year of joining Renault and taking the money, he was announcing that he was not going to be continuing. He was going to be off after his second year. So then he, left and went on to McLaren. So McLaren took on a driver who had already made an incredibly critical decision in his career, which was, I'm not going to stay with the team likely to win a race anytime. I'm not going to stay with Red Bull. I'm going to go with the team that actually, has been, frankly, in transition for as long as anyone can ever. It's been so long in transition, it should be their middle name. They never actually transition to becoming a winning team. So he had already made that decision. So I would have really questioned that. And then, of course, he's joined a McLaren team, which has this superstar young driver, Lando Norris, and the team is very much sort of galvanized around him. And so if it wasn't already Lando Norris's team, it must have become pretty clear to Daniel quite earlier on that it was fast becoming that way. And so I think it's been a slippery slope for a while. The thing for me is that Daniel has it within him to come back. What does it need? It needs, and I'll maybe throw to Alex on this one. One thing I have always passionately believed in is that drivers need the team to be around them, the arm to be around them, to supporting them, giving them everything they need. And that's not to say that McLaren haven't been trying to do that, but clearly there's been something missing. And I think Daniel has to dig deeper and have some serious conversations. I would think it appalling if he and McLaren at this stage of the year are already thinking about, moving on from what is a 3-year contract, and he is contracted for next year. So actually they ought to be doubling down and finding out how can they get a car underneath him that he can have faith in and confidence in. But it's at the moment he almost feels he almost looks to me like a driver who is just slightly out on a limb and not that confident in himself or in the team around him, and it's demonstrating itself in those significant tenths of seconds. In some sessions, you'll see Daniel 6-7 tenths of a second off Lando. It's shocking.
Yeah. Do you think he should stay, Alex? Stay or go?
This is a really tough thing because like Mark said, we all think, oh, is he cashing out? But if that is actually what's really happened, and Daniel Ricciardo can recognize that, then I think the end is nigh, isn't it? Because how do you turn it around? Because you're just not putting the effort in enough. Yes, you need the team around you, but it's about a driver deciding, no, I'm going to fight for this, and what can I do more to push on? Drivers who tend to complain, oh, I need this, and I need this, and they swap teams and they try and get them. And sometimes they get the arm around them. There are drivers famously, you need that. But I also think that's a bit of an outdated model. I think drivers need to be more complete these days, and they need to work harder because the new generation are coming and they're more complete. And I keep talking about this, what they do on the simulators, what they do just outside of just driving a Formula One car, or focused on just improving themselves as a driver. Not improving themselves as a Formula One driver, but improving themselves as a driver. So you can drive things because, engineers, you got to make a fast car. And you have to learn how to drive a fast car no matter what that car is. And if you can't adapt, then we'll stick another sensor, as Mark said, we'll stick another driver in because that's the way you win championships,
Well, it's time for us to take a short break, but don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen, because when we come back, we're going to be looking at the future of the Monaco Grand Prix and also the driver who could perhaps replace Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. There, I've said it. But for now, a quick word from our friends at WebEx.
Late breaking. What do you think?
Love it or no chance?
Daniel, no chance.
Let's put up a poll.
Love it, love it, love it wins.
We need that part.
It's nearly done.
Can you repeat that? That's better.
It's done.
With WebEx, the McLaren Formula One team is collaborating like never before. Introducing the WebEx Suite, driving hybrid work.
Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down the Monaco Grand Prix. Of course, it was won, this edition, by Sergio Perez. Let's talk about the Monaco Grand Prix, gentlemen. I'm joined, of course, by Alex Yoong in Kuala Lumpur and our special guest today, Mark Gallagher, in London. It's been around since 1929, Mark, the Monaco Grand Prix. Does it deserve a place on the calendar? Should it stay? Should things change?
Am I allowed to name drop at this point?
Yes. You're encouraged.
I can. Okay.
Expected to.
Okay. So on Thursday night, I had the pleasure of chatting to Prince Albert of Monaco, and it's his grandfather, Prince Louis II, who together with Anthony Noakes created the Monaco Grand Prix in 1929. And to talk to Prince Albert, you're very clear about the fact that the government of the Principality knows the importance of this race and wants to keep it. And at that same event was Greg Maffei, who is the head of Liberty Media, which owns Formula One. And he actually gave a speech at that event. It was a private event, but we'll just share it between the three of us and all the viewers, that Greg Maffei was incredibly positive about the Monaco Grand Prix and said it's a kind of jewel in the crown of the Formula One calendar. It's a race that everyone wants to come to. It's a race that drivers dream of winning. So the body language and the sentiments being explained by the head of, the Principality of Monaco and the head of Formula One were pretty clear. There are some deep-seated operational issues which need to be tidied up, and those include the fact that race direction of the Monaco Grand Prix is usually in the hands of the locals. They also sell their own circuit advertising, so Formula One have an issue with that as well. Formula One would prefer that the television direction was under their control. They would prefer that all of the circuit signage
not only Formula
was
One
under their control.
I'd vote for that straight away.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then there's actually other little niggling things, and maybe not so little, such as Formula One. And by Formula One, let's face it, we're talking about people like Ross Brawn. See that with a few changes, the track could potentially be brought into the 21st century in terms of creating an overtaking opportunity. Yeah. When I, again, sounds like I had a terribly glamorous weekend, but I took a yacht into the harbour, and they have reclaimed a vast amount of land on the outside of the Fairmont Hotel, just down at Portier Corner. Vast amount of land. Someone told me they've expanded the land mass of Monte Carlo by 9% just by reclaiming some land to build more apartments and hotels. Well, if they can do that, then surely they can create an additional opportunity, be it at the swimming pool or swimming pool complex, somewhere around the harbour front, where there would just open up a corner and create an opportunity for some outbraking manoeuvres, some alternate racing lines to create an opportunity for overtaking. And again, the Automobile Club of Monaco are kind of resisting those kind of changes because, of course, it costs money. The final point, which everyone's bound to expect me to raise, is money, because Monaco does pay a lot less than many other countries to stage a Grand Prix. Formula One, I think, quite like a little bit more money out of them, and that's just a normal negotiation. But I think there's just a lot of factors have lined up. So I think there's a real, it's a crucial moment. My honest belief, there's no chance the Monaco Grand Prix will be cancelled off the schedule. It's just not going to happen. If it happens, I would be just completely shocked. I often compare it to Wimbledon tennis. If someone invented a grass court tennis tournament in the suburbs of London today, it would never be allowed to join the tennis tour. Monaco's the same. It's an event that if it was brand new, it would never be allowed to take place. But it's part of the heritage and history of the sport, and I do think that Prince Albert and the government of the Principality, the Automobile Club of Monaco, Formula One, all of the vested interests, half the driver community lives there. I mean, I think there'll just be all kinds of people pushing to make sure that this Grand Prix is protected. But it'll be protected, and there will be some changes, and that's probably long overdue.
Well, you touched on the circuit, and we saw there a tweet from, I think it's Night Van 24. We've encouraged our viewers to give us their opinions, and he was suggesting that the track does need a modification, as you say. And there was another one which I thought was amusing from Brad O'Neans at the Riotous.
Oh, yeah, Brad, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Whose suggestion is that the track should be wet for all future races. What do you think about that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add to it. I mean, Mark, I think he covered pretty much everything. But yeah, I mean, you can't make it wet on demand. That raises all sorts of issues, because then we can start doing it at other tracks. I'm not saying never, but if it starts happening in Monaco, you'll see it. Why don't we do it at all racetracks? So a bit of wet always makes it exciting. But it's also interesting, because the Monaco Grand Prix is the jewel in the crown. But I was thinking about it just today, in fact, when we were watching the Grand Prix. It is a fantastic race. But for someone like myself who is not from Europe, and I do understand the history of the sport very well, but if I had a choice of which Grand Prix to go to, Monaco would not be my top Grand Prix to go to anymore. I'd want to go to Singapore. I'd want to go to Miami. And it has to be careful about that, because we always make an exception. We know it's going to be a boring race if it's dry, and we go, okay, that's only one race of the year. We can kind of stand it, because it's the Monaco Grand Prix. But you have to be careful. I don't think it is completely untouchable.
No, 100%.
Can I just jump in and quickly say, of course, one major improvement in Monaco over Miami is at least the marina in Monaco has got real water in it. So that was that was picked up by quite a few people.
And I suspect the Paddock Club had sufficient cutlery and glasses and actually water.
The Paddock Club
didn't have drinking water on the first day, which seems anyway. Let's jump from or segue. I'm going to do, if I can, a gentle segue from something that was being talked about leaving Formula One to something that perhaps could enter Formula One. The question that's sometimes asked: who could next represent the USA in Formula One? The answer comes ringing in our ears: Colton Herta, and you might know that he's the 22-year-old, drives for Andretti Autosport in the IndyCar season, in his fourth full season. He's had 7 wins, the youngest ever actually driver to win an IndyCar. But who is he really? Well, we found out.
First race I ever went to would have been the Long Beach Grand Prix, the IndyCar race. So yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, and so obviously racing Long Beach was about 40 minutes from my house. And it was always early April, and I was actually born in March. So my first race I ever went to, I was actually 2 weeks old.
Excellent.
I would have to think that it'd be in some sort of racing fashion, whether that be management, PR, engineering, mechanic. I would still want to be in racing in some capacity.
I thought you'd say you'd be a drummer in a band.
Yeah, well, that's another good one too, but I'm not quite as good of a drummer as I am as a driver, so I don't think I would make it that far. I think I'd rather take the championship without winning a single race, even though that's a tough one. Probably at home doing nothing, because I mean the season's so taxing, and when I do get time off, I don't like to travel. I don't like to do much. Just hang around where I live, just training and do my everyday thing, what I would normally do in the season when I'm home. I think the only thing that I would love to have is teleportation. But maybe even further from that, maybe teleportation where I can hold stuff or touch people and it will teleport them with me. I think that would be cool. It would be very lucrative, I would imagine. But I think just when you think about how much we're on planes and stuff during the racing season, I always think about that. I'd love to be able to teleport.
I always thought as a racing driver it'd be good to be able to go back 30 seconds.
Well, that's probably an even better one.
I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I was actually quite struck by Colton being as young as he is, and yet having kind of very interesting thoughts about how he could make money from teleportation. I'm going to take somebody with him. I thought that was really quite fascinating. Do we think he's got a future in Formula One?
Yeah, I think he probably has, not least because he's got some very powerful friends within Formula One, Zak Brown being one of them. Many of the listeners will know that Andretti, for whom Colton races, are actively looking at an investment that might take them into Formula One. Not many people know that Zak Brown is actually on that management team of that investment group. So there's a very direct link there, which is extremely close. I think the other point is that, as you've already touched on, he's achieved so much. He's only 22 years of age. It's really important to take a driver out of America to come to Formula One at an early age before they come to, if you like, embedded in the IndyCar way of racing. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with the IndyCar way of racing, but it's just that if you're going to become successful in Formula One, you need to make the transition as soon as you possibly can. And even at 22, it's almost feeling like it's a little bit late. But I think he can make that transition. So, he's an exciting young guy. He's got a lot of personality, and as you said, I mean, I love the interview. I love the clip of the drumming. My goodness, my former boss Eddie Jordan would love to work with him, since he's a big drummer too. So there's a lot about the guy. He's not just he's got a lot of depth to him, despite his young years, and I'm sure the energy is there to bring him in. Final thing that I'll say on this is that if you zoom out from the specifics around Colton Herta and look at the big picture, we have a Formula One that is owned by an American media company. We have a Formula One that, as of next year, will have 3 Formula One races in the United States, in Austin, in Las Vegas, and Miami. You have a Formula One which has seen a massive influx of American-owned corporate sponsors, and I'm thinking here particularly of sponsors like Oracle at Red Bull and Cognizant at Aston Martin. So we're seeing a lot of a lot of energy in the US market, and Colton Herta kind of represents the next exciting building block in cracking the United States for Formula One. And I think everyone knows that that's the thing that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I should mention that we've got a YouTube channel, Go F1 Show is what you search for. And I'm mentioning it because we had a good conversation with Zach Brown and Alejandro Agag about McLaren's entry into Formula E. We spoke to Gunther Steiner, of course, who runs the only team representing the USA in Formula One. There's so much more stuff on there. We do lots of chats and interviews with people, and we can't have it all in the live show, but we do have it there on the YouTube channel. So Go F1 Show is what you search for. I want to just touch briefly on some breaking news that's coming in, I'm being told by my producer, which is that there is indeed a protest underway from the Ferrari team, I think, about Max Verstappen's exit from the pit lane during the race, which would be what lap, whatever it would be. I haven't got it in front of me. Maybe I have, actually. Lap 20 something, 23. And we don't have any images of it, obviously, here. But Alex, I remember you saying it to me immediately after the Grand Prix. Has anybody protested this? You obviously thought it was worthy of investigation.
Yeah, you're not allowed to touch the line. And he definitely went over the line. I thought he was going to get a drive-through for that. So a little bit surprised. I wish I could remember the last time someone did that in Formula 1. Because we would know precedents, and I could tell you exactly what the penalty was for. But I can't quite remember that at the moment. But he definitely touched the line, and I think Ferrari have the right to try and protest and see what they can get from it.
Interesting that it's
I'll just interject and say that my understanding is that the first offence on that can lead to a 5-second penalty, which would be sufficient to elevate Charles onto the podium. And on the basis that every point counts, it's probably worth them putting that protest in. I did see the clip, and it looked to me like he had put his front left well and truly over the line, but it remains to be seen. But can't blame Ferrari for there we go. We have a nice little image there on the screen.
Yeah, gosh, I think it's guilty as charged almost, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unless the line moved, the car's definitely over it.
So that's a breaking story, and obviously quite a heavy one. A more light-hearted one I thought was Valtteri, who of course has been raising money for charity with that fantastic photograph of him au naturel. I know that is not what it means, but in nature. I'm not very good at French. And this picture was created by one of the memers, and then Valtteri, bless him, you can see Valtteri in the bottom left-hand side of that image, enjoying the weather conditions.
Very good.
Oh, God.
That's all we've got time for today. Let's have a quick look at, I think what we're going to have a look at now is the calendar. Remind ourselves of what's coming up next, which is the Azerbaijan Grand Prix on the 12th of June. And I want to hear from Alex. I want to hear whether you think that's a Red Bull circuit, a Ferrari circuit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, Azerbaijan we saw last year, Ferrari actually quite good on the infield section, actually. Actually, that one was going to be a bit closer. I still think it's going to be a Red Bull circuit because that flat-out stretch, it's going to be like Saudi Arabia where you see the cars strong at different parts of the track, but I'm going to say Red Bull's going to edge that. Then we go to Canada, Great Britain, and Austria, which I think are definitely Red Bull tracks. So Ferrari need to do what Red Bull have done for the last two races and try and upset the apple cart and try and pinch a win or two here.
Fantastic. And, of course, Azerbaijan last year was where Max Verstappen lost a pretty sure victory with a tyre failure. And we're going to be catching up with Pirelli's Mario Isola before the next race for a chat on these new 18-inch rim tyres and how everything's going this year. I'm looking forward to that conversation very much. As I am looking forward to our next show in just 2 weeks, I want to say many thanks to Mark Gallagher for hot-footing it back from sunny Monaco and chats with Prince Rainier and so forth. And, of course, Alex Yoong in Kuala Lumpur for keeping us alive to things from the cockpit.
Yeah, all right.
That's it. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.